To switch gears slightly, your advice is sought by governments, corporations, legal experts, medical groups. Can you give us an example of where the government or a corporation, someone might have come in and you might have made some changes, some large changes globally for the organization?
Yeah, well, there's many examples that I can think of. In fact, I have a call at 5 o'clock tonight, a conference call with a legal team who is defending a group who are allegedly making some false claims about some devices that they use for the treatment of back. So there might be an example from just my workload today. But I'm thinking of different manufacturing facilities where they would have quite a high price tag on their back compensation for, say, the previous 3 years.
Mhm.
And they'll say, well, let's put in the program, uh, and we call it um, uh, job coaching.
Mhm.
So I can give you an example from quite a prominent company that did what we call job coaching based on our scientific principles. So they hired a public health nurse plus a job coach trained in our system. Uh, that cost about $250,000, their salaries and the office and outfitting it and whatnot for the 1 year. Over the next year, the company saved $1.25 million in its low back compensation payouts compared to the historical precedent of the previous 3 years. So what did the nurse and the job coach do? When a factory worker complained or presented with back pain that was disabling to them, it was affecting their work, it might have even resulted in lost time, and that's what is compensable and the expense to the company. First of all, a ergonomic analysis would be done on their workplace. Is there something that you can do in designing the job to fit them a little bit better and reduce some of the physical stressors? It might involve some work organization, changing the rest breaks or whatever was specific to them. And then they did a little bit of an assessment on that individual and how they moved. And quite often, it's the way that they are moving or the physicality of their body that is predisposing them to the pain. So not only are you looking at the job, you're now looking at the person. So an
Yeah.
example I could give you there, we measured, this is a different company now, and it was fellows who chromed car bumpers. The car bumpers weighed about 70 pounds and they lifted car bumpers all day long. Interestingly enough, uh, when we studied the group all doing the same job, only some of them had disabling back pain and lost time. Others never did.
Mhm.
Now, do you think it was the ones with the stronger backs that were bulletproof, who didn't get back injury? I'll just ask you that question.
Yeah, it would seem that the stronger back would be injury proof.
No, it was exactly the opposite. It
Yeah.
was the ones with the stronger backs who had more injury, but there was more to the story. Then, when you separate out the trait of muscle endurance from muscle strength, muscle endurance turned out to be much more important. And what we found the pathway was those who were strong and didn't have sufficient endurance would lift the car bumpers with good form for a little bit, but then
Oh,
they got fatigued and they
uh-huh.
started to use their backs more and their hips less. Now they stressed their backs and crossed the biological tipping point. So it was actually more protective to have not as much strength, but to have more endurance because that meant you moved well in a way not to build stress concentration. So, I know there's a trend that you may have heard now that some therapists are saying posture doesn't matter and these kinds of things. Well, it matters a lot when you have to repeatedly
Yeah.
lift loads or perform a demanding job like that. So that might be an example of going back to, it was actually a tire manufacturing facility where I gave the example of job coaching. So there's an example of how I might
Very
our
interesting.
expertise, or we might have thinking along the same lines. I can think of an Olympic program for another country in the world where we really reduced their back injury rates.
Okay.
And then we measured what athletes, all doing the same sport, were more resilient to the training. And it turned out if they had sufficient back muscle endurance, but not a tremendous amount. We
Hmm.
used the keyword sufficient. There was an envelope. Just have sufficient endurance. And then we made a statistical cut point on that based on measuring all of the athletes. So we found out how much endurance was actually optimal for maximal training resilience and performance. So
Very.
there might be another example going from a factory to an Olympic elite sport program.
Yeah, interesting. It's really, really interesting. And when we, let me go through, I have so many questions here, and I'm not sure if this is too general a question, but bear with me. You know, we have so many people come in, and of course, I give them the best answer I can, but what do you say and what might be the culprit when you have someone walk in and they grab their low back, they wipe their hands basically across the thoracolumbar fascia, and they say, it just aches here. As a clinician, what can I tell them is going on, and what is specifically going on when it seems that whole tissue itself is just inflamed?
Well, all I can do is describe what we would do.
Hmm.
Yeah. I would talk to them and try and understand. In the interview, I'm doing pattern recognition. So I'm looking for different patterns. Is it worse when they get out of bed in the morning? Is it associated with a specific activity? Is going for a walk relieving or exacerbating? Then I want to know about a little bit about their home life. What clinicians have they been to before, and what previous treatments have they had that they've failed with? Because I don't see frontline back pain people. I only see the failures. So they've already been to 10 or 12 clinicians, and they've been conditioned to fail. But then I find out that nowhere along the line have they had a decent assessment. So consuming what I've just heard, I then bring them down to this room here, which you see. There's a patient table, and I've got a lot of gear around where I will assess their pain. So I do provocative testing. I'll just have them sit on a chair just to begin, and I'll say, pull up on the chair 20 pounds per side
Yeah.
or 8 kilos per side. And does that increase or decrease or change your pain in any way? Let's say they say no. Okay, then I'll say slouch. Not with your head and neck, just with your spine like this.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, that causes my right foot to go numb. That didn't change my back pain. Then I say, good. Oh, yeah, that makes my toe go numb. Oh, there's my back pain right there. So I just identified as we drifted the spinal cord, they had a friction that was causing their back pain. So we've already determined that their foot pain is 100% posture driven, and we'll sort that out. Is it a sciatic root, or is it a bulge at either L4 or L5, which are the two roots on that would serve the foot and give that symptom? Or is it that they are moving and there's a friction, say, at T9 because of some existing damage? And then at the end, I'll go to the MRIs or the CTs if the person has brought some imaging. And I know there is going to be some friction causing mechanism in their lower thoracic spine. because that's what the assessment showed me. Now, when I go and look at the MR, I can say, aha, there it is. You've got an open fissure dynamic disc bulge at T9, or you had a compression fracture at T9. You fell off a skateboard, or you fell down the stairs, or whatever it happened to be. So it really locks us on as to the feature that we're seeing on the MRI. It may be painful or it may be not. But if you don't have the context of previously assessing the person, you have no idea whether that's a pain generator or not. But if you look at the MRIs afterwards, now the magic unfolds. And this is a huge problem with medical practice broadly, in that the radiologist who reads the MRs or the CTs never sees the patient. So they have no context for the features that they're seeing. And then they publish papers, oh, medical imaging is not helpful for back pain. And I just have to shake my head, because it's incredibly helpful if you do the assessment of the person first, and you have a very good idea of what their specific pain triggers are. So I hope I didn't get too off topic there on you.
No, gosh, no. I love that you're giving us some nice full answers.